now that we have a tool for establishing what good means, that's ultimately the reason to have a tool like performance continuums, is if you agree that the language you use to talk about a thing strongly influences what you will get when you make a thing, then having this robust language of performance is how you can represent what good means. Not with pictures yet, and not talking about how you're going to do anything. But in terms of what we're going to do, we know what good means. So now that we know what meaning is, what can we do with structure relative to meaning? In 2007, in the 2000s, there was a lot of hand-wringing among people who make digital products and services because of the advent of tagging and the idea of, I told you about a word called taxonomy earlier, the arrangement of meaning and context. In the 2000s, an idea was hatched called Folksonomy, which is that regular folk, would do the work of organizing digital products and services. When you go to a Facebook page, if you see, oh, my nephew's in that picture, and he hasn't been tagged yet, so I'm going to tag Jimmy, you just helped build the folksonomy that makes that information system cohere. And the idea, especially when David Weinberger wrote this book called, what is the name of the book? What's that? Nope, it's the one before that.
Everything is miscellaneous.
Everything is miscellaneous, thank you. Wow, it's been a while. So 2007. The idea that information architects, people who are experts at organizing information, we don't need them anymore. Because the ability of computers and artificial intelligence to understand meaning is going to get to the point, or is at the point, because we no longer have atoms. A lot of library science and a lot of what Weinberger is responding to is that first generation, or depending on how you number it, second generation of information architects who came out of librarianship. His bias is all that stuff you guys know about organizing stuff to make it work is based on atoms. So you saying, yeah, we have this thousands of year tradition in librarianship of organizing information. It's like, yep, and you were moving stuff around, and guess what? We don't have stuff anymore. So a lot of what you guys know and would do to make a system is based on these ideas about order that no longer fit the world. So the idea that there isn't a best way to organize information, that was a shot across the bow of a lot of information professionals who thought, well, I'm an expert at finding the best way to organize information. Some of you might even be here thinking, I'm going to learn about a better, maybe best way to organize information. This guy's saying, no, there isn't a best anymore. But I resist this notion that there isn't a best way. There isn't a best universal principle across everything, sure. But in certain contexts, especially equipped with an ability to talk about what would be good for us to make, there is the best way. If we are selling duck eggs, if we could organize the information, if we could architect it, that digital experience, so that it is really, really, really about that, our ability to sell is probably going to be much better than if we had a less differentiated structure to do business inside of. So I wouldn't interpret, I think some of that, we live in Weinberger calls it the fourth order of order, where there are locations, there are contexts where things are. There isn't a spot where the thing is supposed to go. Sure. But if we choose, through the things that we make, to tend in a direction toward why are we going to do this structure versus that structure, structures have meaning. There's this wonderful tool called Wireify that you can add as a browser bookmarklet. And so if you go to a website and you hit this bookmarklet, it will do a structural analysis of the page and then re-render it to you in this form. And what I should have done is covered up the names of the site here. But just looking at the structure of these pages, the structure of Tumblr, and the structure of Adidas's commerce store, there is the equivalent in digital space of ducts and decorated sheds in physical space. There are ways that so when we talk about space, back to that idea that Facebook is a place where things happen, places and spaces. When we were working with those performance continuums, we were working in, if you'll allow a fancy word, in semantic space. The place where meanings of words happens is sort of a semantic space. This is, to get fancy on you, this is an architectonic space. This is a place where there are things and structures that are manifest, not in terms exclusively or primarily of meaning, but in terms of spatial. There are relationships. Having a big thing with some navigation over here lends itself to storytelling and sharing pictures and things. That structure means something. And if you try to do a store that feels like a blog, because of reasons, because of what you sell has a storytelling sort of aspect around it, you could start adopting patterns that mean things to bring them closer to what you're trying to accomplish. Or if you're this is Starbucks store tab right now, is this. It's pretty much your standard e-commerce store with the filters on the left and grids and the, this means stuff. And especially now, there's this great article in UX Booth magazine about information architecture patterns for mobile. And the reuse and the adoption of these patterns, just like Tumblr, there's like a physical modality of blog. It just looks and feels like a blog. This looks and feels like a store. These structural moves that designers and architects are making are starting to have meanings attached to them, just like certain types of shapes of buildings have. You can pick out a church, not because worship places always had pointy things on them, because in our context, they do more often than not. And so that shape starts to mean something. If you put a restaurant in a church, it means something. It's Alice's Restaurant. If you put, have you seen the chain Quakers? It's like a play on an instant oil change place, but it's really steaks and beer. Instant, what's it called?
Quaker steak. Quaker steak.
Quaker steak.
Yeah.
Yes, and it looked, and they have adopted, so back to they have made this metaphorical structure. So they started in semantic space with this, we're gonna do this weird pun play on words, and we're gonna go to town. And they just didn't make a box with that had something that looked like an oil change. They've adopted it whole hog. The costumes, the checkered flags, the beer in a dirty, it's all, it's great. So shapes and structures start to have meanings, just in context. And the more your customers become accustomed to what these things mean, the more you can harness these meanings and choose them on purpose. Or you can choose to not adopt certain structures that have some meaning attached to them because it doesn't line up with what you're trying to accomplish. And if somebody's saying, yeah, but the kids, they love this Tumblr thing, we need one of those, there are reasons based on some performance continuums and an elevator pitch. You could maybe talk them out of a bad idea just by saying, do you realize those structures mean something? And that's not what we're trying to mean. This sense of architectural space, this is Brian Ferry's website. He has a new album out. This is what you get when you go to brianferry.com. You can't read it here, but it says continue to brianferry.com up in the top right. When you click through, then you get the normal website. And this is like a vestibule, right? Or this is like a pop-up store. This is going to be here for a little while, and then it's going to go away. This sense of using these spaces, whether sort of in an architectonic way to say, well, this is kind of like a vestibule, or just sort of semantically to say, no, this isn't brianferry.com yet. This is an entry experience, and then the actual experience happens over here. Shaping structures to mean stuff. Richard Saul Wurman came up with an acronym for the 5 ways that you can organize information. Latch. His theory, and he's sort of like Houdini with take a punch from anyone. He's issued a challenge. If you can come up with an additional one, he's willing to take it on. But organizing on the basis of location, which is huge right now for mobile, on the basis of alphabetical order. If you're on a hospital website, you need to find a liver disease, but you also know the liver disease is called some long medical term. Alphabetical, time, category, hierarchy. There are these specific ways. And the idea is that the way that you're going to sequence the information has meaning. That if you line them up by location, that experience could mean something different than if you organize it a different way. And I have a brief video to show you to illustrate latch, if I can make this function properly. Okay.
Designers have found different ways to represent information to influence the ways in which viewers interact, think, and understand data. There are many different ways of projecting data, however, none have been more effective than the principle of the 5-hat rack. This design principle asserts that there are a limited number of organizational strategies regardless of specific applications, which means that the data is arranged by 5 main factors, also known as latch. Latch is location, alphabetical, time, category, and hierarchy, also known as continuum. Let's start with alphabetical. Alphabetical refers to arrangement by sequence, like A to Z. Examples include dictionaries, thesauruses, and encyclopedias. This method of organization is most effective when information is either non-linear, specific, or when there are no other strategies appropriate. Time, being our second factor, gathers information by chronological sequence. Time is most appropriate when data is displayed and compared over fixed intervals or durations based on time. Examples are historical time maps, calendars, and timetables. They can also include step-by-step processes such as recipes and IKEA product instructions. Location refers to the organization by geographical or spatial references, and is best used when information is influenced by orientation or wayfinding. Historical sites, maps, trains are the best examples, as they show the flow of data fully related to geography of places. Category is found when information is arranged by similarities or relatedness. Museum, archives, library catalogs, and Mondelez's periodic table are examples that data can be clustered by similarities that exist within the information. This design is most effective when viewers naturally seek information by category. Finally, hierarchy is defined by magnitude such as highest to lowest and best to worst. Examples include subject types like trees and animal taxonomy charts, where information can be compared by common measures. These are the factors for the 5 hat racks. But how can it be converged together to organize information? This is easier than you think. For example, one day you decide to go to the supermarket. Hierarchy and product list allows you to track down the products, which are usually arranged by alphabetical order. This would help you to pinpoint its location within the store. When you get to the store's category, determines varieties, flavors, and brands, which can influence you to purchase certain products, and time is shown through the use by dates. But it doesn't stop here, as if you take any random product from the shelf, the principle is similarly applied. If life gave you a box of chocolates, you'll never know what you're going to get, but the contents can be categorized by placement within the box, name of the chocolate, manufacturing date, similarity in colors, and by popularity such as flavors and brands. This principle of design may seem minor, but it plays a vital role. In this example, the 5 hat racks affects the placement of products within the store, which then influences the products that the consumer purchases, in turn affecting market and economy. But this principle does not lie in supermarkets, and you don't need to look far and wide for the magical rule. It can always be found in places like your wardrobe, to your pantry, even your daily exercises like getting from point A to B. The 5 hat racks are a powerful and fundamental design principle, which affects the organization of information, which in turn influences the viewer and the way in which they understand and interact with information. This has been a very special presentation from the Department of Universal Principles of Design.
Okay. So yes, latch. 5 ways to organize information. And in a book called Information Anxiety, Richard Saul Wurman used the example of dogs. He loves dogs. He has 3 golden retrievers named Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And he had this thought experiment. By the time that he wrote this book, he had already invented the TED Conference, and the TED Conference invented a lot of things, including like the gift bag, like the awesome gift bag. And one of the things that TED always had in the gift bag was a teddy bear that looked like Richard Saul Wurman. So he had a relationship with the guy who ran this stuffed animal factory, and so he had this thought experiment. If I could get stuffed animals for every AKC breed, male and female, and then line them up in all the different ways that you can arrange by using latch. So location, where are the places that these dogs come from? And if you arrange them to see geographically where those dogs came from, just by looking at them, you would understand a lot about this pile of dogs. If you take the females of the most popular breeds and compare them, and then take the males of the most popular breeds, all of these different ways of organizing information, what he contends is you don't get to simplify. It's not about, and this is one of the ways that he sort of differentiates information architecture from information design. An information designer is trying to make a layout as legible and as beautiful and as well designed as possible, and sometimes they want to take stuff out in order to make that design cohere better. And what he's saying is, no, you don't get to, the dog pile is the dog pile. But we can arrange these things in ways that make certain meanings clearer than others. And because the creative organization of information creates new information. But there's some little transformational moment that happens there when we decide, so the hats aren't changing, the hat racks change. The dogs, you don't get to disinclude the tricky dogs. You have to work with all the dogs. And so how are you going to do that if you use another tool that he invented, this performance continuum language of saying, well, when we arrange these dogs, these are the reasons. And we're not talking about how yet. This is where sort of the what and how come together, is these choices about organizing. It begs this question, toward what? If we do it, if it's true that the organization of information creates new information, if we call that new information X, does X lend itself to what your business is trying to do? Does X lend itself to what your customers want? Because it's a new thing that you made with those choices about how the information is organized. Guess what? You've made a new thing. And this thing could have tendencies that are the wrong ones. So this question of toward what? The most convicting use of these continuums, and then we'll take a break. The most convicting use of these continuums in our work to date with an organization. So we said, this is where you're at today. You have nothing for mobile. People who are looking at your site on their phone are pinching and twisting and doing all the things. We wanted to build consensus in this big organization that was taking on some expensive questions like mobile. So what we did was we used these as a survey. We said, hey, Tug, we're experts. We think you're nowhere when it comes to shaping what you offer digitally for mobile. We did a poll of your staff, all the deciders, so this isn't just like low-level folk, this is like C-level, V-level folk, and some staffers. And then the average is here. But the average actually doesn't tell us as much as what you can't maybe see is those gray, you kind of can. So those gray stacks here, this is the distribution of the votes. Most important person in the company, second most important person in the company, developers, everyone else. So toward what? That is a pretty interesting question. And using this tool of the performance continuums to say, this is how we're going to set our direction. You can use these in a way that can show too much truth. If we were to show this to them and identify who was saying what this actually shows is there probably isn't enough institutional togetherness for us to adopt the average of the will in the decider group. So if I'm going to recommend a bunch of services to them that are this far on the continuum, this is the one who's signing the invoice. So to say what does good mean, sometimes what good means is unevenly distributed across the organization. So using a tool like this to render what good means, it's really great as a designer or as an architect, because then if somebody says, well, it was, yeah, I had my targets. But getting the right ones is hard, and it's not foolproof. Questions? Objections? Okay.